Ömer Bey, sizsiniz. Burada çevrim içi kaydı olmuş. Tamam, o da gayet iyi, sevin. Peki, teşekkür ederim. Değerli hocalarım, değerli misafirler, Fuat Sezgin İslam Bilim Tarihi Sempozyumu'nun ikincisinde Mavi Salon'da oturumda bir aradayız. Bu sempozyumun hazırlanmasında Kaya hocamız başta olmak üzere emeği geçen herkesi, her kademeden arkadaşımızı, hocalarımızı tebrik ediyorum. Oturumunda 3 konuşmacımız var. 1,5 saat kadar bir süremiz var toplamda. Konuşmacı başına konuşmamızı tamamlayabilirsek kalan 5 dakikada da soru ve katkı olursa katılımcılardan, hocalarımızdan onları dinlemiş oluruz. Bu şekilde ama 3 dakika, 5 dakika geçer geçmez onları biz ayarlarız, sıkıntı yok. Güler Doğan Averbek hocamız ilk sunumunu yapacak. Fuat Sezgin'in Akim Kalan Bırakılman projesi hakkında Oscar Reşer'in konuşmasını yapacak, tebliğini sunacak. Kendisini dinliyoruz Güler Hoca. Şurayı açarsak sesinizi herkes duyuyor olacak.
Teşekkür ederim Sayın Başkanım.
Buyurun.
Ben çok farklı.
Yani kendinizi sıkmayın. 25 dakika zamanımız var. 5 dakika sorulara hazırlıklı olun. Olursa.
Evet. Ben 20 dakika diye öngörmüştüm. Hazırlığımı ona göre yapmıştım. Biraz,
5 dakikada benden
evet,
yani.
Biraz daha rahat herhalde.
Buyurun.
Çok teşekkür ederim. Çok teşekkür ederim. Sağ olun. Evet, ben evvela başlamadan önce Doktor Hanstein'ın selamlarını iletmek isterim. Malum salgın sebebiyle gelemediler. Çok selamlarını söylediler. Müşterek bir tebliğdi. Ben konuşmaya bir Flemenk atasözüyle ve atasözünün Flemenk meşhur Reşer'in bir sorusuyla bağlayacağım. Müsaade ederseniz eğer, sabır gösterirseniz. Fareler düşmanları kediden kurtulma yollarını tartışmak üzere toplanırlar. En azından kedinin gelişinden haberdar olmak istemektedirler. Pek çok plan tartışılır. Nihayet genç bir farenin planı beğenilir. Tek yapmaları gereken kedinin boynuna çan takmaktır. Bu esnada burada aslında atasözünün detayı bu. Bu esnada ihtiyar bir fare söz alır ve sorar. Genç farenin planının çok iyi olduğunu söylemeliyim. Fakat müsaadenize sormak isterim. Kediye çanı kim takacak? Jan Just Wittkamp, Geschichte der Arabischen Literatur adlı eserin bizzat yazarı Karl Brockelmann tarafından güncellenen fakat basılmayan nüshasına benzer ehemmiyette en az 100 nüsha daha olduğunu söylemektedir. Bu nüshalardan biri de Osman Reşer'e aittir. Reşer, Gal'in 1937-42 yıllarında neşredilen Zeylin'e yıllarca ilavelerini ve tahsillerini not etmiştir. Burada şunu da söylemek isterim. Gal'in biliyorsunuz ilk edisyonunun revizesi de
and Reşer it has this copy as well, and there is only less update, but the main issue is addition to the Zale, and Fuat Sezgin, together with Resher, would like to make it together, but they had to withdraw. And this is our third study regarding Resher, and we had a book section and the second article from Ahmet Hamdi, I would like to thank, published last week from Islam Teknik Institute journal. And this is Resher's in the Berlin State Library. So the list of 100, actually there is a meaning for that. You will see it will be the connection, and in the speech until now the information of Resher we would like to, so what we can call it, Gal Brokelman art, what can we say about it? We can say the literature, the Brokelman uses this as written material. What did Arabs wrote, or what has been written until now of this art, Gal, still one of the main reference. It is showing the importance of it. Brokelman first give, and then with the arts and copies he supported, and in the beginning the first volume is 18th century, and the remaining part, the second part, is by Felber. I'm saying this especially because maybe he is the person who opened the box of Pandora, because Brokelman provides, and Felber is a famous publisher, but he is also a cheater. He goes to Felber. Felber says, prepare a book that I can sell, and as a bonus then I can print the book you want. And Brokelman is agreed. That's how Gal is found. Actually, in order to make his book to be published, they publish Gal, but from now on Felber, the problems continue. In addition to the first publication, the Zale, the supplement, it being 1937-1942, and in the Gauss magnified on complex structure, just one exemptable reason. The first publisher who cheated Brokelman held the copyright. For this reason, Brokelman had been unable to issue the expanded edition of the first volumes. There are other studies that he needs to do, therefore it was not related with the first publication. That supplement was prepared, and the updated version of the first issue was in 1943-49, again published by Brill. I would like to summarize here. Brill in 1996 made a new edition, and in 2009 and online, and it was translated on the English and by the History of the Arabic Tradition, both online and as also printed it between 2016 and 2018. It was given to the researchers, and the uncompleted Arabic translation with the name of Tarih al-Adab al-Arabi by the independent group, it was published. Muhammed Hamudullah's Urdu translation is yet to be published as far as we know. And Brokelman, what kind of study he was doing? Brokelman, which he prepared only with the help of manuscript catalogs and biographical dictionaries. He used his photographic memory. He is reported to have been able to list all the copies of a work and their locations from memory. Unfortunately, this brave pioneering work was plagued with many errors and omissions due to information being written from memory. In addition, another factor in what was the contents of the majority of the manuscript collections had not been collected, and copies of many of the works had not yet been published. And previously, Whitcomb and Mehmet Kanar have previously mentioned Gall's weak points.
Ben görebilmeniz için İngilizce ama
It is in English, but I left it for you, and now, due to his memory writing and other lack of techniques, the Gall's weakness caused another thing, which was, until today, to date, some initiatives have occurred aiming to adapt Gall's legacy to the demands and developments of science, although thinking to the copies of Gall have been revised as a result of the faults and shortcomings categorized above in line with the Whitcomb's remarks would be reasonable. Your opinion that Oscar Recher has an exceptional place among these who have consistently and systematically done this. Think like this. Everyone using Gall finds some lacking things and then correct it, so more than 100 correction. Here Osman Yeşer and the 3 copies we know, and we mention him a lot, so who is he? Just check him. By the way, a brief mention of Recher would be useful. His full name was Oscar Emil Recher, and before the Ismail dies, and I'm telling this because of the Ismail Saim, he is very dedicated to him, and he committed suicide the day he dies. Then he has another life. Oscar Recher, full name was Oscar Emil Recher, was born in Stuttgart in 1883. He completed his baccalaureate in Oriental languages in Berlin. In 1988, he completed baccalaureate. In 1999, continued his studies at the University of Leipzig. He became a doctor. Then 1910, continued in Leipzig University. He served in the First World War. He was drafted like everyone, and his mission was to censorship, and in close to Berlin in 1998. And here he took his doctorate, and in Wrocław he became professor. There is an important issue. Since 1999 he started going to Istanbul. When he was called for military draft, he was in Istanbul, and his visits to Istanbul, what he calls, first we have looked at these manuscripts, he checked in the library, and then he wrote as the manuscripts, and in the library catalogs, the German catalogs, and especially from Ismail Saip Efendi. And in 1925 from Breslau to Turkey came, and a very short time in Ankara. Then until he died, he lived in, and 1937 he became Turkish citizen. He worked in many institutions, and the last one is İslam Tetkik Üniversitesi of the Istanbul Literary University. Today once more is being restored, the Islamic Research Center, and of this institute, with this, it has a relation with this manuscript, and his grave is in Silivri Kapı. I looked a lot, but they sent me to Jewish graves. Then I found 2 surahs from Rahman Surah. He has that gravestone. Of Recher, in relation with Gall, a very important feature In the times he was in Turkey, thousands of manuscript was provided to European and American libraries. It is important. It is known that he was selling these, but they didn't know the scale. As I mentioned, we have seen that there is 1,192 manuscripts. It's approximately, it has the documents of the sales. Giving a break here, the relation of Rescher with Brockelmann in the Breslau University, they know each other because they were doing their work in the same faculty, and they have we think they have respect. In the life of Rescher, he defines as the son. His relationship with other Ismail Sahib is based on benefit. For example, a geography dean of he also referred because he was dean there, and also to Köprülü. So his relations are based on benefit. And Brockelmann, starting from here, he might be in a strong position in the institution. I just assume this. I want to show you this, another relation with Brockelmann. This is the cover of one of the manuscripts he sold. So it's thousands of manuscripts together, and he listed while he was selling Berlin State Library, he is also studying and selecting and providing a service. He lists the services, and not only listing which art are there, he is just checking. One of the catalog style books, one of them is Gali. This is the first and fourth art in Brockelmann. Both of them are the second volume. You can see the references. So he's related with Gal Elat since the beginning. We can tell. And now, when we check the updated version of Gal, what we know as famous three Gal copies, which is famous, but like Whitcomb says, it should be more than 100, and it's possible in the first of them. I don't have the image. Brockelmann personally updated until is that he continued to correct that copy. Today is of the MG, which means the German Orientalist Library, and the second one is the copy of Sezgin. I took this from Wikipedia, and from the library officer I have learned that they have the full copy, and also one volume is as original. And Sezgin, just like Rescher, found the mistakes and lacking of Gal by putting papers in between when the margins are not necessary, by adding the information he reached here. And now I want to say as a question mark, I was waiting a photo from Germany, but he went to northern Iraq, so I couldn't get this week. I wondered this updated version of Sezgin, these pages, by comparing with Rescher copy, I wanted to see, because we know that Sezgin uses the Gal version of Rescher, whether they also signed it in their own copy. The Rescher copy, the right one is from Rescher, other than many sold, many manuscript he found, bibliographic studies. As you know, Süleymani Library tried to classify them, and Topkapı Library was prepared. He helped Karatay as well. So actually, it's thousands of manuscripts you might have seen, and many time in the old bookstores. So he always updated the Brockerman copy, and I believe he noted all the, and when it is not enough, he put it additional papers. And in 1959, Sezgin of these girls updating and classification, and he took assistant Ramazan Şeşer. He discussed with him and then says, I have seen the broken one of Reşer. There was many notes, maybe half of them was notes. And now I would like to say this work of Reşer actually was never up to the purpose printing these, or he didn't have any purpose to prepare an updated version. And while these notes more, so in the addition to this list, this updating and classification of Brockerman is a serious work, and Whitcomb completed it 100 years ago. He was taken. Today no one can do it, including himself. Until now, no one dared to prepare a real update of Gal. It proves this. Reşer, as I will say the detail of the list, he put this note at the end of the list. I don't recommend making a new print without considering my correction and classifications, but who would want to wear the cat to put a bell on it? No one can do this, just like Whitcomb says, he says, and elsewhere he wants. Reşer's this what he does, Sezgin knows. And from Islamic Technical University it brought. In the beginning he was happy about it, and with Salih too we discussed this. Every information is added there, continue to update, but during this time they changed the direction of the project, I should say, in the beginning. Just like in the beginning, he will update Gal and put all the information, then later on he withdraws the plan, and until our day I will cover. So he withdraws updating the Gal. When he says this to Reşer, previously he accepted to be a partner of the project. Due to change in the project, he also withdraws, and due to old age of the Reşer and the uncertainty. But I see this, maybe it will be malintention, but I believe Reşer was thinking, because he was saying that only the service is to redact and classify. So for 30 years he gathered that material and would give it to Sezgin, but Sezgin wants something else. They would go to libraries again, find the copies, editions. This is something else and very long, so Reşer withdraws. But we are sure that he is Sezgin to use his copy. Salih Tun also said, and Ramazan said. But what is unexpected, there is the 1960 military coup, then he goes away from Turkey and he couldn't use Reşer copy after he left country. I can gather like this of the list. In the beginning, what does Reşer says? I would like to say to you, these are all from the copy of Recher. I should say this. This is from Recher. Due to classification works of Süleymaniye in the Brokelman copy, I made lots of corrections. So after having to deal with this giant art form many times, I have this recommendation for future editors. I understand that he doesn't want to go into this work, but he wants people to learn about it, and this list and editors should pay attention to this. Turkish, English, and German. You will be able to see it when it is printed or some other way. You may wonder where is the Gall copy of Recher. It is in Germany. I visited it, and with the gentleman, and I've talked with 4 times. Maybe we did it. First, how the copy is going, let me tell this. When Recher goes away, there is the Recher is a famous tall collection, and Haze, Professor Haze, in Bochum University works, he knows about it, and he says to Eile König, if you give the Gall collection to me, we can send the stamp collection. They sell it to UK, and the Gall collection is given to Haze. Today it's in her lot. She was planning to give home, but in our discussion, Nicholas Recher is known as an Islamic philosophy worker. It was all in Berlin State Library. Upon the proposal of Dr. Hanstein, then Haze accepts to give it. At the moment, Berlin State Library will take it, then digitalize it, and the last word with the Recher edition of what Whitcomb says, the corrected copies of Gall, taking them at hand and transferring to a digital database would be helpful for the science community. We also would like to thank you. Thank you and congratulate you. You mentioned important things for the field. Something, and the manuscripts in Turkey somehow they are going to abroad. Everyone was saying to this. For the first time I heard it. Osman Beşer thousand Hall and Feinstein. Correction from whom Rescher, how many liras, like this. He was with liras, so it's like pound lira conversion. I got my answer. Distinguished lecturers, any contribution or questions to Mrs. Güler? Mr. Said asks first. Thank you.
Sure, in Arabic.
Durumu.
فؤاد سيسكن المترجم يطلب أن أتحدث بالعربية. فؤاد سيسكن قال أنني حاولت أن أكمل.
Yok ben.
Hocam,
I don't know Arabic.
bir surat
I
koptu.
will in English, it's okay.
Şunu alır mısın?
No problem deal. I can speak in English, it's not a problem.
Okay.
Okay, Fuat Sezgin has said that he tried to complete Brockelman works, but it was full of mistakes, and he couldn't continue this work. For that, he chose to throw everything and start from the beginning. At the same time, I know from the Arabic world, nobody now use Brockelman because of the mistakes are in Brockelman. For if you want to do again, you should to make updated copy or something new is much better. Nobody use Brockelman anymore in Arabic world because we know it's full of mistakes. Thank you.
Ben şunu söyleyebilirim bununla alakalı. Bunu mesela zihnimde
My area is different. I work in the former Turkish literature, and I have seen that in my studies in Berlin, the Arabist ones who work in Arabic arts, they all have the volumes of Brockelman. They use it despite its mistakes because it gives you a clue and it takes you someplace. Maybe in Arab world they don't use, but it's not my field. But definitely it takes you somewhere. It can be a starting point from you, whether it's full of mistakes. Thank you, Mr. Şükrettin. He first raised his hand. As I know, Rescher between 10 to 25. Here he took literature and served Brockelman and retired services about it. As you know, Deutschmann was representative of. So what did Ritter say about it? Do you have any information? I wondered that there is no information I have regarding Rescher provided information to Brockelman. And also Brockelman mentioned Ritter. He says these are from Ritter. Therefore, I couldn't reach a data about Brockelman, and Ritter's is Brockelman writes from Istanbul. I should say this, maybe there's no question, but despite Brockelman was in Istanbul, why I didn't use Istanbul libraries? The reason is that in time Brockelman was in Istanbul, it was not in his agenda, and when there is it in the agenda, he was not in Istanbul. So they tried to fill this gap with Ritter. And his books, as he used the manuscripts, there are some printed books like Amidye. It is being sent to him, but also Ritter personally support by sending manuscripts. Thank you so much. It was a very nice presentation.
Kütüphanelerden çıkmıyor değil mi? Korkumuz o.
Rescher'in sattıklarından bahsediyorsanız ben şunu hep söylüyorum, tekrar arz edeyim. Çok aradım bin mühür, yani Cumhuriyet sonrası en azından müessese şeyi veya son dönem bulamadım, göremedim. Reşer'in yazmalarında şöyle bir şey de görmedim, onu da arz etmek isterim. Mesela ilk sayfaları yırtılmış, hunharca koparılmış, yok edilmiş, mühür yerleri iptal edilmiş yazmalar görmedim açıkçası. Bende oluşan, şu ana kadar oluşan kanaat, bunları zaten sahaf kurdu.
Walking around the second-hand books. For example, Feridun Nafiz Uzlun has a study with them. He is talking about a valuable manuscript. He was saying that if I didn't buy this, Reşer went to second-hand book, but he promised to the owner of the letter, he told, if he doesn't buy you, I will send this to German library or Horosowitz. He is also second-hand book. He is also a publisher and he can sell whoever he can, but there is no trace of library because Mr. Fahrettin mentions about these miniatures in the manuscripts. They are cut sometimes without diligence and sent to exhibition houses abroad, and more than 100. And so making a connection with them is out of our topic. We couldn't find such traces. I should say selling in the auction is out of my field. I cannot see, and the state libraries do not pay a lot, so he cannot sell to Berlin then. But if you ask whether he sold Berlin alone with miniature, no, thank you. We have exceeded time, so we have 2 more speakers. And in between, you will have chance to talk. Thank you so much. We can talk a lot about it, so I believe it should be spoken more. The second speaker, Dilek Güllütuna. Among the Frankfurt Arabic Islamic Sciences Historical Institute Islamic Medicine Serial. You are a guest, so you have 50 minutes. If more, I will give to Şükrettin. Distinguished lecturers and guests, first of all, I would like to thank everyone supporting us. Before the speech, like Mrs. Güler said, who can put this bell to the cat when he wrote it first to his lecturer Ritter, he sends, but for a long time he couldn't get, and the opinion was so important whether he didn't like it. However, after a while it was such a nice answer, so no one could do it other than you. It was very nice. I wanted to add these. The Institute Geschichte of Arabic Islamic Historical Science Institute was established in 1982 and 2017. In all around the world, the researchers was attracted, as you know, and the institute library with exponatlar museum, and it's a full field institute. In his art, Fuat Sezgin expresses the rightful position and also, and along with that, also he wants some unrevealed arts. So 1,200 volumes were published, and it goes until the 18th volume, and most of them are a part of this a series bibliography and Arabic manuscript catalogs, encyclopedias, and also original arts. And this multilateral and is being a part of where they are in the studies of Mr. Fuat. So it gives us both the methodology and also the purpose, important opinions, and at the same time it will shed light on the field university. And first of all, what are there in these activities starting from 1984 by the expert colleagues prepared, and from 1984 it's 30 volume nearly, and as they have time, these manuscripts are being directed by Sezgin, and later on it was published both in journal and also have it published in the institute publication. And there is a bibliography, Arabistic and Islamic sciences on German. So starting from 90s it was published, and 27 volumes, and since then it was not known and unknown or not edited. So it's like this similarly, and some of them was former Greek scholars, and along with them Fuat Sezgin, among the institute efforts, many manuscripts preparing and publication. Along with the institute effort, there were some other researchers' bibliographies, among them the most comprehensive one, institute contribution. When it comes to that, the researchers around the science history, right after a short time, the institute starts this comprehensive study. So, of these main sources, translation to European languages, and with chronologically and systematically to be published and publicated. In this picture, it's only 100 pieces of medicine series within this scope. If we check these serials as a list, the most comprehensive one is 318 volumes of geography, 79 volumes, and here there is the cultural geography and the human sciences. They are important sources. Here the mathematics and astronomy, 114 volume, pharmacology and medical and music, and numismatic is 56 volumes, and the classification of sciences is 60 volume, and architecture 28, and on history is 15 ones. Our purpose is to take this Islamic medicine into center and check this, and its place among the studies of the lecturers and having the collectors to know about it. It's very important for the disciplines. Here we can see the GIS volumes. The third and fourth is natural sciences, and he planned to write 2 pre-volumes, but he had some of Islam, Arabic sciences, and its Arabic translation I would like to explain, and the translators should be there with their translation. Only with careful examination of everything, more data is taken. These 2 only can be written after the natural sciences and philosophy are made. This is still waiting for me. And when we check the volumes of GIS, generally the entering parts are the long examination. If you look at the subtitles in the 5th band, the current status of the examination, research and development stage, and Arab math scholars, and the 6th volume is more detailed. It's start and reception and assimilation and the start of new planet models, these kind of assessment regarding the Arabic astronomy and the philosophical and bibliography and biographic sources, and it's the band 8 from Fuat Sezgin, this assessment, and this kind of assessment and the nature and history of research, first time in the 3rd of these bands, which are addendum. As you can understand from subtitles, mainly the source of the first era and development of the disciples, and also opinions, especially regarding the importance of the first period. Mr. Fuat has a principle, Arab Islam science, nearly all of them starts in the first Hijri year, as it is known. The institute, the edition and translation of these, and by this way and the advantage of in Istanbul, these manuscript sources, and most of them he took as microfilms to his library, and along with the original sources, another topic is the history of the research. Among the targets objectives, there are some articles in a brochure by the science people, and also expressing and the Arabic original, and also translation into an Arab Islam, and a central library, and also a microfilm archive, and for the professor and researchers to be invited for symposium and seminaries. And the 5th article, so reaching them to Arab Islam countries. Colleagues, according to this article in the Sciences History, the conclusion of the Arabic colleagues should be introduced in a starting time, and like it was found out, it was in the beginning of the 19th century by the French, and then Germans continue this study. And as we mentioned regarding the German studies, there is 27
كان هناك كتابة مقدمة للأستاذ فؤاد يتحدث فيها عن العلوم العربية.
So it is a explosion of sources for today, and there is the lesser amount of the researchers. Sometimes the researcher completes, and other than that, in starting from the beginning of the 19th century, which is made in Europe and cannot be reached in the libraries, there is the trouble of reaching them, and the institute, the second sources, especially the researchers in the Western, to be, and by this way, in the beginning of their research, they can have opinion, and this will prevent its unnecessary efforts. And the Islamic medicine is 100 volumes. When you look at the first 5 volume of Ibn Abi Usaybi's, the medicine biography from 13th century, and for the first time its edition was made with August Müller, a German. The first two volumes is the exact printing of the medical history, and the following 3rd, 4th, 5th volumes are about the studies of this art. You can see the content of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th volume in German, English, and French. At the same time, in Latin, it was made. These are the studies, and from this biography, partial translation, and their assessment, their important studies. And there is also even PhD dissertations. When did this research started, by whom, in which topics it is possible, and some of them in 19th century, and in the journals it's not possible to reach them in the libraries. And Ibn Abi Usaybi is a doctor himself, and a comprehensive book, the important biographies of it, and this is the start of the Eastern medicine. It gives important information. It's about to finish. Then this is followed by Avicenna, the origin of the Kanunul Fütun, and the next one is about the arts of Ibn Sina, and then Hüneyn ibn İshak, Ebu Bekir el-Razi, important physicians of the era, first original source, then second literature, and as a result we can say, as a lecturer of the history of sciences, Fuat Sezgin, for the students and the researchers, he handled a seriously difficult task presenting this to the researchers as an institute activity, and he says like this: we pushed ourselves in the objective due to high amount of the materials, and regulating them, it will be limited. The same way what should be taken and what should be left behind. But if there is a strong foundation, then the gaps in bibliography can be completed. And this selected serial is related with it, and we should pay attention that they are related. So all these are for a school for the sciences history. At the same time, such a study with the saying of the lecturer, this Arabist and Islamic sciences, this Western-oriented studies, it will give an idea, and these Orientalist contribution in introduction of Arabic Islamic world to be taken at hand as a just way. Thank you so much for your patience. We also would thank you, Mrs. Dilek. And for if you don't have any questions or contribution, I would like to invite Şükrettin. I believe they will complement each other because our lecturer wrote 17 volumes, and it is important information and what is being done in the institute. Mrs. Dilek gave us, so she used a school term, sharing knowledge with the science community. Such a lecture, he didn't keep anything. Yes, Ms. Şükrettin. We have 20 minutes left. I need to open the slides first. Technicians can help. Please help the slide to be open. Distinguished lecturers and guests, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this symposium and everyone who contributes, and hopefully our hope these symposiums to continue. The topic of my presentation, Professor Fuat Sezgin, in abbreviation GAS, which is uncompleted 18th volume. First of all, I would like to thank Mrs. Uzlu. She gave me the dossier and knowledge regarding 18th volume. In the left, Uzla, and in the right, daughter. This volume was yet to be completed. The news was up to media. Most of the listeners here as they are not aware about the background, so I would like to give information. Fuat Sezgin in the institute for everyone to get benefit. The books of Mrs. Uzla also to be presented in the institute library. And of the books, in order to diversify from the foundation book, he labeled them with white, and the foundation book was labeled with yellow. And the number of his own book was like 40,000, and the yellow labeled foundation book are like 15,000. And Mr. Fuat was not trusting Frankfurt University due to few years ago the Orientalism department, when it was closed, the famous and rich Orientalist library was divided to other cities and universities, and he was afraid that his own library to be like that, so they decided to take their books to Turkey. At the first stage, 15,000 of books by regular custom tariffs was sent by cargo to Turkey. And the next week, Mr. Fuat said he will leave Germany and that he will take his books to Turkey afterwards. The institute in Frankfurt, they complained that he was stealing his books, and in May 15,000 of book was packaged for cargo. Some of them was sent to the airport, and the customs officers seized the books. So Fuat Sezgin was accused to be against the protection of cultural arts law, so he was questioned, and his story is the time May 2017, where the global crisis, political crisis with Turkey and Germany. The questionnaire was very political. The first sentence was Fuat Sezgin, who is a close friend of Tayyip Erdoğan. On the same page, a photo of Sezgin with President Erdoğan was also given there. During the questioning, Sezgin's study was sealed, as you see, and he was given the secretary study, and from his own study only his booklet with the phone numbers, then all the other books and the study is of the 18th volume of the manuscript. The famous German newspaper also by Rainer Hermann, it was mentioned. And then the prosecutor with the Mr. Fuat and with the counselors, he sees that the books belongs to Fuat Sezgin, and then published and translated in total 17 once, the astronomy, etc. These kind of 17th volume, it goes like that, and the 18th volume was for philosophy. And when it comes to the 18th volume, with his own words, it was the most important of what he wrote until, because the most prominent philosophers of the Western depends on the Islamic philosophy. He was saying like this: until 19th of century, the Islam philosophers were making the Westerners under shadow, and among them there are some arts which requires the Western philosophy to be rewritten. The manuscript of the Fuat Sezgin was digitalized partly, but in the manuscript it was like 450 or 500 pages. In May 2012 was left in that sealed room, and then interestingly it was lost. This manuscript was not in the arrested belongings list. If you look at here, as you see,
Ses gelmiyor. كان الصوت ضعيفا جدا والآن اختفى الصوت.
now we lost the sound. We are waiting for the sound to recome. But despite witnesses are there, the manuscript does not mention there. And the Frankfurt policy states that the loss of the art is invalid. Such an art was not registered, and everything was in the sealed rooms, and the book and other arts in the sealed study. There has been an inventory. By this way, the police closed the issue. And when it comes to what we have, the first pages are from Avicenna, from his books and biography. As you see, the lecturer was talking about the philosophy and medicine books of Avicenna and listed them, and first Kitab Şifa. And this list continues like this. Let me show you from 15 to 30.
Kitaplar sıralamış hoca İbn Sina'nın.
These are listed regarding philosophy and ethics. It goes to 119, and after the 119, it is written with his own manuscript. As you see, I try to read it. Widerlegung.
Ibn Sina gegen ein
In German, it is the original manuscript of Avicenna.
eser Risatul Azak,
Which means the Art 120 of Avicenna. One of the counterparts who is complaining about that the sources given by God are not equal. Mr. Fuat here, first of all, the biography of Avicenna and its sources. And the main source is El-Jucani's text. And El-Jucani is the student of Avicenna and also continued its autobiography and published it as monography. Later on, Mr. Fuat finds the manuscripts, the libraries of this Topkapı Ayasofya Nuri Osmanlı British London Library, and also translation of this book in different languages. In the text of Fuat, the biography is given in full, interestingly. The first part written by Avicenna himself and also taken by El Jucani. A passage from this book, Avicenna says that it's very interestingly, if I cannot solve a problem and if I cannot find the right solution, I go to mosque, I pray to the creator of the universe until the door is opened for me and that my burden is released. At night I return home and put my lamp, I continue reading and writing. When the sleep comes or I feel weak, to regain my power, I was taking 1 glass of syrup, then continue reading. When I go to light sleeping, I was seeing these problems in my dream. Most of them are revealed in my dreams. By this way, all the sciences were provided in me. And as much as a human can do, I was comprehending. I know everything I know that I didn't learn anything additional. I didn't have to. For this purpose, in logic, physics, and mathematics, I mastered. Then I go to theology. I read Metaphysics of Aristotle, but I didn't understand, and his purpose was close to me. I read it for 40 times and I memorized it, but still I didn't understand. I didn't know where it tried to reach. Then I lost my hope and I said, this is an ununderstandable book. One day during my pray, I was visiting bookstore. One seller was yelling. He gave it to me, but I gave it back because it doesn't help in sciences. I believe in that. He told to me that purchase this from me. It's cheap. I give it for 3 dirhams and the owner needs money. Then I purchased it and I saw that Ibn Nasr al-Farabi metaphysics books, it was a letter about it, and when I get back to the home and I read it at home, then immediately the metaphysics of Aristotle, which I know very well, was revealed to me. I was happy and I thanked God and I donated to poor people, many of the rich and weak. After this biography, Avicenna, nearly all of them was published, more than 300 sources and study. And Mr. Fuat later on goes to the Art of Ibn Sina. 119 was listed and the other one was added with letters. In the first order, Kitab-ı Shifa, the book of healing, the most important philosophical book of Ibn Avicenna, is a 25 volumes of philosophical encyclopedia, and it has 4 main parts: logic, nature, mathematics, and theology. You know, Riyaziya is mathematics. The art could not reach the modern day. Mr. Fuat also lists the relevant books in details, and then first in Spain with Gulusani in the 12th century, it was translated partially into Latin, and then the other translations in the continues until the middle of the 13th century. It's most of them translated into Latin, and Mr. Fuat also mentions the translation and the relevant editions in other books. Shall we wrap up? It's about to finish. And also, some of them depends all time. For example, in 14th century, Tijani study. Later on, second book in the list is Kitabu. It's about nature, mathematics, Riyazi, and music. So he is also checking in the Kitab-ı Şifa, the just distribution, Kitab-ül El-İnşaf, Ibn Sina's and Aristotle's all books and their 20 volumes of a book, which he assesses all them, and there the sources and comments are mentioned. According to some news, during Sultan Mesud against Ghazni, it was partially lost. El-İşarat in rank 5. It is the latest and most essential books. Regarding this important art of Ibn Sina, there are important studies, and the same critics like El-Caznabi, El-İtirazat or Fahrettin El-Razi, Lübabul İşarat, and of Fuat and Ibn Sina's edit, number of the shares are much more, and in El-İşarat are among them by Sezgin, which is listed belonging to Avicenna. The 36th art is logic, theology, nature, and mathematics, which is written in Persian, which is Danışname. A little bit more detail is going in the 37th El-Hikmetül Nasriye. Here Puckok's 18th century gave great attention, and until 1920s the science community has long studies about it. The 18th art is a poem about the relation between soul and body, and it is about the soul therapy, and it's an important book impacting the Christian scholar. In total 119 books were, and the digital part is finishing here, page 57, as you see, and as I said, they are all digitalized and they are the page with us, and the part which is not digitalized and in manuscript is 450 and 500 pages. This is the lost part. And similarly, Avicenna, the Farabi, and as it is planned, this is my prediction, in all the volumes of JC, after completing the book, he was writing the entrance, and from here he can assess the whole and put forward what is there. And what is different from his colleagues is that he is talent to analyze and synthesis. Professor Sezgin, the impact of Sezgin on European science of history of science, is not in the part but in a conference he gave in Germany. He mentioned this shortly. This is my last slide. Mr. Fuat says that for science history it is not yet discussed, but for me the most important opinion moment for me is the Avicenna's main book, Kitab-ı Şifa. It starts with that. Kitab-ı Şifa, translated into Latin and including physics, logic, and other sciences. It's between philosophy and theology. It makes an interesting. In the 13th and 14th centuries, this great theologist philosophy was dealt by the Christian European world.
يحتوي على كبيرة جدا.
At this point, the ideas of Avicenna, Thomas Aquinas was influenced, and there is a recent study shows that Thomas Aquinas' art was getting stationed in 430 places. It shows this. And from this first 2 centuries are the first centuries of Renaissance. And Mr. Sezgin also mentioned this. Distinguished guests. Of course, we want the lost manuscript to be found. Thank you for your patience. We thank you a lot, Mr. Şükrettin. And is there any remark or question from the audience? Both Mrs. Dilek and Şükrettin we can take. Otherwise, we thank them again and close the session. Half an hour later, we will see you in the second session. Is there any question you would like to?
Tabii buyurun. Ethem Sancak Bey, buyurun. Herkese saygılar.
Greetings everyone. Like Mr. Şükrettin says, the lost copies should be found. But Mr. Fuat was very cautious. You are very close. If we look well, he should have an insurance about it. We should find them, and then we need to tell this. Why? Because math, astronomy, geography, physics. So we have a good level with the help of the lecturer. He proven that the Islamic civilization contributed for 1,000 years, and the Westerners cannot refuse it, because this is the reason they close it. For 300 years they were manipulating humanity, but philosophy is very important. And for the last round, the philosophy is very important, because what starts with Bacon, the Western systematic, then ancient Rome, then Renaissance, and discrimination of the Eastern theory will be removed, because they will see that along with Christianity, the diminution of the ancient Rome philosophy is not because of the big Islamic philosophies, because if there were no Ibn Rushd, what is said, this modern, the Western world system wouldn't be seen. Therefore, the modern Western thinking system bringing together, and Aristo is only possible that it is taught, and Aristo and the next ones to be revealed, and from Italian, France, once more it is given by the Islamic philosophist, and he would prove this. And then Hegel says that Marx says for Hegel, Hegel's philosophy is a head over, and I have corrected it. So we have corrected this Western system, and everyone should hand to hand thank you for these nice remarks. This 450 pages is not loose. Maybe someone is still being waited to be found. Hopefully, the next year's meeting, we will start with this information, we hope. Because he is one of the closest. Thank you so much for this session. If we don't have any further questions, it seems so. But one more hand while we are saying no.
I know about this volume. I know he was writing it. He told me that. And also he told me that all 40,000 books in Frankfurt, he bought them one by one from his own money, not from any university money. This is a private library. Also, I would like to say something. If we had, Fuat Sezgin did a great job, but this is unfinished work yet. We have his books. Now we need scientists to extract the science from his books. And if we have financial support, we can do this. I was working with him in this matter also. So somebody will prepare these books like he did. But now you need, for example, other scientists like physicists to extract this information from these books. This is very important about financial support to use books of Fuat Sezgin correctly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Şükrettin Hocam, var mı söyleyeceğiniz bu sözler üzerine?
Mr. Şükrettin, do you have any things to say about it?
We need at first his manuscript, and I hope we will find it in the next years, and then we can try to end the book with some scientists who are masters in this field, you know. You know, we have them, but he has written a new manuscript for this, and therefore we need
Evet, teşekkür ediyoruz herkese.
Thank you everyone and see you there at 30.
Kıymetli katılımcılar, değerli misafirlerimiz, 2. Uluslararası Profesör Doktor Fuat Sezgin İslam Bilim Tarihi Sempozyumu'nun 4. oturumuna hoş geldiniz. Malumunuz bu sempozyumun ana teması İslam bilim tarihinin metodolojik yaklaşımlar. Bunun içerisinde aynı zamanda genel bilim tarihi yazımının metodolojisi üzerine de bazı oturumların olmasını arzu ettik. Ve sağ olsun bugün bu oturumu aslında 3 hocamız birlikte planladılar. Metodoloji, bilim tarihi yazımı metodolojisine farklı zaviyelerden, farklı perspektiflerden bakan 3 tebliğ dinleyeceğiz. Ve bu vesileyle de İslam bilim tarihi çalışmalarına bu yeni perspektiflerin neler kazandıracağı umarım dinleyiciler tarafından takdir edilecektir. Ben çok fazla oturum başkanı olarak vakti uzatmak istemem. Esas söz tebliğcilerin çünkü. Onun için ilk konuşmacımız Fatih Sultan Mehmet Vakıf Üniversitesi'nden Nihal Özdemir hocamız. Bize sosyolojik bilim tarihi yazımı üzerinden İslam bilim tarihi yazımı teklifi başlıklı sunumunu arz edecek. Teşekkür ediyoruz katıldığınız için hocam. Söz sizde. Buyurun.
Hocam ben de teşekkür ediyorum takdiminiz için. Kıymetli katılımcılar, hocalarım hoş geldiniz. Bizi YouTube'dan takip eden izleyicilerimize de merhaba diyorum. Biz gerçekten bu İslam bilim tarihine metodolojik arayışlarda Avrupa merkezli bir karşılaştırma yapmak istedik. O yüzden 3 hoca bir araya geldik. Derya Hoca ve Pınar Hoca'yla. Sunumumuz da bu minvalde olacak. Cüneyt Hocam'ın da söylediği gibi. Profesör Doktor Fuat Sezgin İslam Bilim Tarihi Sempozyumu'nun genel amacı aslında İslam bilimlerinin tarihini keşfetmeye, yorumlamaya ve günümüz için anlamını tespit etmeye yönelik bir çabadır. Bu sempozyumda ise biraz daha özelde İslam bilim tarihinin gerek bir bütün, gerekse tek tek bilimler açısından ele alınabileceği konusunda da yerleşik metodolojilere ek öneriler arayış içindeyiz. Bu maksatla bilim, tarih, din, felsefe, toplum, siyaset, ekonomi ve dil arasındaki ilişkiler ağının kesişim noktasında yer alan İslam bilim tarihine ne tür metodolojik araçlarla yaklaşılması gerektiği, farklı disiplinlerdeki metodolojik perspektiflerden nasıl ve ne oranda yararlanılabileceği önemli sorular olarak aslında karşımızda durmaktadır. Ve benim de burada ele alacağımız metodoloji bu amaca hizmet etmeye yönelik bütünsel bir bakış açısı içinde olacaktır. Öncelikle bilim tarihi yazımında yaygın kabul görmüş olan pozitivist görüşe karşı ilk olarak 19. yüzyılda ortaya atılmış ve çağdaş bilim tarihi yazarlarının benimsediği bir yaklaşım olan sosyolojik bilim tarihi yazım metodunun İslam bilim tarihi yazımında daha yaygın kullanılmasının verimli sonuçları olacağını düşünüyorum. Bilim tarihi yazımında pozitivist yaklaşım yıllardır kullanılıyor ve biliniyor. O yüzden bu yaklaşım üzerinde özellikle durmayacağım. Ancak yer yer karşılaştırmalı olarak bahsedeceğim. O halde sosyolojik bilim tarihi yazımı derken ne demek istiyorum? Ve onun kapsayıcılığı derken ne demek istiyorum? Bunu açıklamaya başlayayım. Sosyolojik bilim tarihi yazımı aslında George Sarton tarafından kurulan ve en eski ve en prestijli bilim tarihi kurum ve yayın organlarından olan ISIS'in tanımında bu yaklaşım sonrası şöyle bir ifade ekleniyor. Sosyal ve tarihsel bağlamın içinde bilim tarihi. İşte aslında bizim de burada ele alacağımız konu tam da bu ek ifadenin açılımı ve İslam bilim tarihi yazımında bilinçli bir şekilde kullanılmasına yönelik olacaktır. Ben burada ISIS'i seçtim ama sadece onun özelinde de değil. Bu London Royal Society'de ve birçok bilim tarihi bölümlerinde artık sadece History of Science kelimesi kullanılmıyor. Sosyal ve tarihsel bağlamı içerisinde bilim tarihi ön plana çıkıyor. Bu da sosyolojik bilim tarihi yazımının bir sonucudur. Tarihi tabii ki yeniden üreten hiçbir yöntem bir zamanlar ortaya çıkmış bir olayı gerçekte olduğu gibi yeniden canlandırmayı başaramaz. Başka bir ifadeyle aslında ne demek istiyoruz? Değerlerden arınmış bilim yoktur. Bir bilim insanını incelerken bile onu nasıl sosyal ve kültürel bağlamından yalıtarak alamıyorsak, uzun bir dönemin geçirdiği değişim sürecini de o dönemin sosyo-kültürel ve ekonomik değerlerinden bağımsız inceleyebilir miyiz?
Be search without sociology, and regarding this approach, the main common point can be said like this, and science is a social event which can be understood within the environment. It's a social event, and it cannot be examined by isolating the principles, and it should be the positive approach only deals with academic and theoretic perspective, so removes the daily practice supporting the individual scientific approach. In the lab of the science people, there are traces from its society, which means that when that science person goes into laboratory, the social aspect is also going to the lab. So if you distribute it with the positivist approach, gives you lacking result, and you are prisoning the science person into an objectivity which he cannot perform. Is that right? Like in all the history of science writing methods, there is no single text or story. Somehow we prefer the stories which we find close to us, and the stories in what we write, we are selective, like Kostas Gavros says. While reorganizing the past, we are adding something from us. Actually, this is idealized by the positive approach. It questions its objectivity really as to how much we are successful in our claim to be objective. Instead, as a offer of Stephen Shafi, the scientific integrity is a much more solid proposal. What is this? The science people is not independent from the culture and society he or she lives in. So by trying to remove these traces, instead of claiming a fake objectivity, instead we should present these effects to the readers. So we should put the science people into a conscious place. Chopin, in the proverb of the scientific objectivity, says that the scientific revolution may have many narration, but while I'm telling you, I continue the path of my ancestors. It's better than trying to convince the reader that we are objective. It's much more transparent, and these are the scientific integrity. Without using the science history, it's a much more convincing history of science can be written, said by Shafi, but he doesn't do it, and whatever his ancestors follow, for example, ancient Greek is the beginning of the modern science, he says that I will pick the same way. So he openly, transparently reflect what he is being doing to the reader. Therefore, he represents with scientific integrity. And another examples of the sociological science history, I will continue over the science revolution, and it is important to show its transformation. It's a nice example, and the statement of science revolution, the famous science historians, while examining different point of view, so we will see the methodology. It was used firstly, the science historian knows, the French historian of science, Alexandre Poiré, uses in 1939, and before him a very similar definition by French philosopher Dastin was using it, but Bachelard was not saying this science revolution but mutation. Actually, it is much more including change. It includes a process. It's a much more correct word, but Alfred Rupert Hall again says prefer the science revolution word and make it its title, And actually the scientific revolution disseminates through this title of this book, and the mutation word is forgotten. But today we know that in the science history writing we don't prefer, as it is mentioning a breaking, and there is Arab novice and Devist approaches. Actually, the 17th century's transformation, they find themselves within the science revolution or in a much more different structure as a repairer of the old. And only 1 century later then, the French intelligentsia defined themselves as the breaker of the ancient culture, but they were the repairer of the old ancient culture. This change, according to American Kuhn, the science paradigm of an era is broken and a new one is mentioned. And while Corey is focused and it doesn't give a importance to empiric aspect, but Thomas Kuhn is trying to show the very narrow concept, but still appreciate the Kuhn's approach, so more positivist. And Dutch Coire says that the modern science, which is not mathematical, is ignored, and the non-mathematical part is out of assessment only. Copernicus, Newton, Galilei, and Hessen, Boris Hessen, the Russian, is much more closer to the people. And in 1931 in London, the Principia of Newton, its social and economical origins. He had this article and he says that scientific knowledge production is not only produced or supported by social institutions, but moreover they are directed by them. These are also the existence conditions of the scientific knowledge, and IDA are the Newton studies, says that Newton studies are a production of the era. Hessen take these problems, which is tried to be solved by that century, communication, war, and industry, which are the social structure, and these are the technical problems, and the interest of the new science is accordingly, and the technical and physical problem, and rising bourgeoisie, and economical and technical problems. So observation, theory, and trials, what is being observed depends on the geniusity of the science people and observation skill as an explorer, or free of all the prejudices, the observation skill. It does not depending on them. Actually, what is to be observed and to be a topic of science is shaped by the, according to the problems selected and according to the claim of Hest, their social and economical roots cannot be ignored. And the positivist approach says that in the socio-cultural background is only change of the scientific, the Principia of Newton is only an intellectual work, but in the social aspect that Newton idea should be found. And the thesis of Hessen also says that the success of the new science depends on economy and intercontinental trade and mining, and all the development process affects the study of Newton and shapes them. So that according to Hessen, what the 19th century tried to find, the main scientific problems are the social and economic structure of the time, These are the technical solution results, technical response. They are so dominant that at the same time optic, static, electronic, and magnetism works at the same time are second-handedly important. Therefore, the thesis of Hessen, the socio-economic level in Newton's universal rule, it's a very influential argument in 1931. Hessen's social history science right narrative. If there is the historical event separation, what makes the social one superior? When it's asked to a positivist science historian, what response do we
Anlatır diye bir soruyla karşımıza çıkıyor.
It was such a question, and I want to answer this as British sociologist Steve Wallner. So, the validation of the fact is actually it's the social event, and finding out the relativity of the scientific facts is the success of the writers like whom sociologues make this separation as not a data. Instead, the sociological task says that what is wrong and what is true depends on what social process depends. And the other answers, let us ask you the same question between the Hessen's dissertation in parallel to Henrik Grossman. In Europe, there is a huge social change, transition to capitalism, its economic impacts, and with this and Grossman, with his thesis, says that this historical and social change is important for the history of science. In the historical process, a method which is not change, so there is no principal explanation for science. Just like positivist science history, every initiative due to their own assumption, independent from all kind of influences, while trying to explain the internal dynamics, they are ignoring many other relations. These methodologies for the topics they don't explain, they always multilateral and lacking. With this acceptance, the unsynthesizable compense for the scientific concept, there is no other truth objective. And in 1931 article of Hessen, the approach of understanding the science, this cannot be understood by science.
Oldu. Pozitivistlerin bilim dışı olarak gördükleri parametreler, Polonyalı ekonomist özellikle farklı ülkelerden bilim tarihçilerini, ünlü bilim tarihçilerini ele aldığımızda aynı iddiada bulunduklarını görüyoruz. Pozitivistlerin bilim dışı olarak gördükleri parametreler, Polonyalı ekonomist ve tarihçi Henrik Grossman teziyle Avrupa'da gerçekleşmekte olan
the great social change in Europe, so its impact going to capitalism, and this is the Henrik Grossman thesis. It also highlights the importance of the science history. British philosopher she's just reading the text she prepared before, and she didn't give this text before to the translators. Therefore, I will just try to summarize. However, these are very long academic sentences which she prepared before, so I can only summarize it. Sorry for that. And these are in relation with the social relation. What Bernal says, this is not isolated, and of the scientific rules are not actually much wider understanding for what psychologists positivists change. It conditions the science people, and in the area of the science revolution, I continue the methodologic change. There are important studies. This time, American sociologist Robert Manton, in 1938, he said with the relation between science, technology, and religion, that the science legalization is forefront, and from Max Weber, he was influenced Robert Merton. Actually, Robert was, but also Merton, especially on this economical impact, especially between the relation of the science classes, and in Merton in 1930s in the Royal Society's economic studies and success. There are some studies of that, and especially it is the proof of impact of the social events on science. In his article called The Science and Social Order, the emotional rules, orders, traditions, and values, and preassumptions. So it is used such a term. And of Robert Manton saying 3 centuries ago, so the science, when asked a more independent authority, the nature's philosophers, similarly, it's again a very long sentence. So, chasing the science had no value then. However, along with the success of the science, what is actually only tool becomes objective. Then they see themselves as independent. So the science is within the society, but not for society. It's a self-initiative they take as, and so this optimistic approach should be provided, you can say, but this point of view is unfortunately isolating the science from its social aspect. And Marxist science historians, the renewal of the natural science is with the new relations, how closely they are related. So within this approach, in actually giving the modern science, for the first time, Austrian science historian Edgar Schein indicated. He said that it is the creation of the unnamed craftspeople and recognition of the thesis of Schein, the Austrian science historian Crombie provided, and generally Crombie is not in the 16th century, but it started in 17th century, so it is a longer discussion. Mathematic physician Pierre Duhem, he followed. However, Durkheim in this thesis focused more in the academician in the Paris University and Crombie in the Oxford University. And Edgar said, while appreciating craftspeople, he didn't underestimate the academician, and they said that the craftspeople and the academician are complementing each other. However, Zoe give a passive role for them, and Zissel give more active role. According to Zissel thesis, in the modern Europe, the craftspeople and intellectuals have mutual influencing. The purpose of this thesis is to take attention to the contribution of the craftspeople. Actually, the thesis of Zissel says that from bottom to top, and of the craftspeople took the foundation of nature-based, and for sociological science history, this is a very new and different comment. And in John Bestmont Bernal, in his study and the relation between science and society, the thesis of science, and the methodology of this thesis is the internalizing and externalizing approach, balancing and holistically, and a science to be understood as science, the trust for that. Again, one paragraph sentence. And Bernal said this in the last 30 years, the effect of the Marxist opinion, the nature scientist, not only their practice but also theoretical approaches are shaped by the social incident and pressure, and there are some against and also some protecting it. But during this discussion, the science has a, unfortunately, the opinion of science has an impact on social. Bernal says exact words, my purpose is the progress in the natural science as to how much it influenced the social sciences. So,
Evet, hızlı gitmek.
I tried to go fast, but I believe I'm up to last 5 minutes. I continue, and Marxist science history is important to show the importance. What is accepted as the scientific knowledge, and she's just reading. Sorry, I don't want to translate, but out of respect, I am trying to summarize you. And this questioning in the 1960s, the disappointment of the Western societies, and it was also merged with the threat of totalitarianism. After Mrs. Pınar, Mrs. Derya will also be talking similar topics, and it will be much more clearer examples, I think. It's a topic, it's the actually the authority of the scientific history is now an unquestionable manner. After the modern times, it's an option. By this way, the social scientific knowledge against other methods, the strong belief that it is privilege is just a Western opinion. And in order to understand the science, the cultural heritage studies are important as the source, the scientific knowledge is the same with the other beliefs, and talking about this in high voice are the main ideological vein of this. And another focus group is especially she is just reading her pre-written text, which is not a presentation. This is just reading a text, so I'm still trying to translate it. And the relation of the fact and truth and the feature of representing the science, it's problematic, which the positivism cannot foresee. And of this situation, the biggest problem is that the positive-oriented, internalized and externalized approach to neglect the external approach and ignoring it. So, finding this problem is the area which is the science epistemology. She's just making the sentences as long as possible, and this is not a presentation yet again. It's just reading her article, which is written academically, and it's not fit for simultaneous interpretation unless it is pre-given to us. I'm so sorry, but it's very unprofessional. We would like to thank Mrs. Nihal. It was a very wide literature. If there is any English listeners, can you please tell the moderators to the presenters not to read text. This is a presentation, not text reading. We cannot simultaneously translate a paragraph-long sentences because they are not given to us. If that's the case, I will not continue to translate. Please inform the moderator. First of all, distinguished speakers, you are all welcome. I would like to thank İstanbul Üniversitesi, Fatih Sultan Mehmet Foundation University, and I'm very honored to be a part of this. And in today's presentation, what was the scientific approach in the Middle Age Europe and the analysis of this kind of concept. First of all, what is the scientific revolution? It is very hard to explain for Middle Age Europe. There is complicated thing in the Middle Age with the Eastern and Western connection, forgetting of Europe. Actually, as we forget the Western, we are lacking in assessing the scientific research. What is important here is the effect of the Islamic world, because the science understanding in the Western knowledge, because the knowing is an act of human, so it is affected by the social aspects like language or religion, because as it goes from the concept of science is related with what is being tried to understood. At this point, the relation of the science and religion is the most effective way to understand. Again, this is not a presentation. Like Barbara Tuchman says, the Christianity is the matrix of the Middle Age Europe, because from Christianity it's not very free, and from time to time it changes, and once they were trying to prevent, but then they try to support. We see such time in the Middle Age Europe. When we look at the Islamic world, actually we had a Renaissance. We don't use Renaissance, but I want to use it here because establishing Beytül Hikme during Halifet Meymun was a Renaissance for us, because there is the East and West interaction by bringing translators from everywhere. Sanskrit, Greek, Roman, all the arts are translated into Arabic. He gave great attention to science people. Okay, this is like a presentation, and this is in the 12th century with all these pillars. Actually, Europe started constructing new buildings, and this new buildings was called as the 12th century Renaissance of Europe, and actually it is the turning point of Europe. Generally, in the 15th century, we talk about the science renaissance because they say so. But actually, in the real meaning, when we go deeper, what makes Europe Europe? The real renaissance is the 12th century. They also say this, and in their arts, they say that the turning point of our history is the 12th century, they say. Therefore, the effect of Islamic world in Europe, we see them openly, and along with the Renaissance of the 12th century, whether there are Renaissance or Renaissances in history, there are some sayings. And in the 15th century, science Renaissance was only in one country, in Italy, and the previous Renaissances are mostly in the dynasties, but the 12th century for all the Middle Age and all Europe, and the next process of Europe. And this time, what makes this faster and what makes it more influencer is the establishing of the universities, because in this period, the origin of the university started at that time in the year 1200. Maybe at that time there were crusades how the Europe could succeed or assess the scientific approach, but we should not miss that. Actually, the crusades were not only wars from east to west, it was one of the way of conveying the knowledge, and also there is the universities, and for that period the scholasticity was preventing the science, but at that time it was transformed because the scholastic philosophy with the Anselmus turned into dialectic and questioning to be going both in the life of the students and also in the universities, and this also helped the increase of curiosity and information in the people. Therefore, establishing this universities is the turning point of the Europe, and it's the main changing point of relation of East and West. I want to say that we talk about Orientalism in the Bacon, we have seen it because Roger Bacon actually was saying that science can be reached by mind and trial. There is no other way. So both Thomas Aquinas' modus vivendi, which re-updating the lifestyle, and also of the Aristoteles arts and of the Ibn al-Haythami's follower. His own scholar, he is also proud to be his understudy, so somehow he was complimenting. Roger Bacon was a knowing chancellor, and another importance for European history, actually it was the scientific crusade of his era. It's an interesting saying, but they do so. Why? Because Roger Bacon has a dream. It was the universal peace, but as to how they could succeed it with Christianity and also with the dominion of the Roman Empire. But when we look at the next periods, Roger Bacon with their studies, he had changed in himself and he has changed in his ideas. So then he decided it can be reached to with mind and trial. And actually the prosperity of the world stands with the, as you know, his era was scientific crusade. Actually these crusades are not the war but the way of knowledge. Roger Bacon has a general understanding of science. All the sciences are together, all the other sciences helping, they are supporting each other, and not only for themselves, for the prosperity of all the world. They work with a new understanding the scientific world of the with Galilei and with Copernicus and with Newton in the Enlightenment time. It's a new era While all these things being happening, for example, Roger Bacon talk about alchemy. It's a dual science, he said, both for nature and medical. So, is there any change in the social sciences? In the social sciences, Francis Bacon has some studies. In the next time, actually, the main purpose of the social science is how the prosperity of the humankind can be provided on earth, or how we can change the destiny of the humankind. And similar studies are made, we can say, at this point. There is not only a single renaissance in history. The most important one is the 12th century, and in the Middle Age Europe, it's an important turning point for scientific searches. And what we say, the scientific revolution has some conclusions. When we look at them, first there are science schools. For example, in the upcoming period, the French Academy or London Royal Academy, these social schools came up, and also rationalism is important, and Newton was put the final point because there is heritage from the Middle Age. And another way, during this time in the Middle Age of Europe, the religion restrictions are over, the mind are more important. Man can shape everything with mind. The world is an open book for the world. So to explore this, humankind is just a vessel. So this started to be taught. As for the technology, I should mention it, because in the Middle Age Europe there is this belief. Actually, it is just the age of belief. It's not only an age of belief, and also there is a curiosity, there is a need, and also there is the feeling to be free. All these actually was supporting the scientific revolution. And as for the technology, the Middle Age Europe has their unique studies. However, in these studies, there is the East-West interaction from Vitruvius to Al Jazeera to Leonardo da Vinci. So there is an East-West synthesis. There is, however, along with the scientific approach, we still need the state support for the technology. At the same time, the early capitalism, I'm talking about the scientific capitalism, because in between the parallelism is much more attractive. What are the features? And there was the feudalism, and it was shaping the feudalism of Europe. However, everything turned around, and the current features was conveyed from rural areas to urban, and instead of religious people to bourgeois and also craftspeople. Therefore, the system was completely changing, and again, as I said, it shows itself in a time. This rationality is one of the most important part of this scientific revolution. We can say that with all the scientific approach, there is the dynamism, and this how this dynamism is created. Of course, not only it, but the science and technology was unbreakable unity, and it was wrong to descend them into a single civilization from Greek science to Roman and then Islamic science. In the 12th century, it was the peak point, and then from east to west there is the coming of knowledge, and it helped, like the Sultan says, the modern sciences is the engineering movement of an elite group. And which is this? The change and the sustainability. There is the government problems, there are the power plays, but interestingly, it can continue. Imagine that recently the Orientalism approach, its time was in the 12th century, it was started. There is a change, and I would like to say with this new approach, there is a new civilization in the Middle Age of Europe. Actually, our point of view, our approach to Middle Age Europe will change. While ending my words, distinguished Professor Dr. Fuat Sezgin, he has a saying, he says, actually we need to know Western. Why do we not know them? Why we don't have an Italian historian or German historian just only working on Germany or Italy or UK? Of course, there are some people who work on them, but we need to make it institutionalized. Therefore, at this point, we can say that the West should be known. And there is another saying of Thomas Aquinas. He says the wisdom is the common work, and both of them are equally important. We thank Mrs. Pınar. She talked about European history of science in relation to their own conditions and with Eastern-Western relation. I didn't mention, but we can get the questions at the end. If there is no problem, we will listen to Mrs. Daria. Is that okay? Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear us? Yes, I can hear you. Very nice. Daria Gürses from Bahçeşehir University. Today she will be talking about method seeking for centrifugal. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to attend from Zoom. I want to talk over general problematic, and then I will go into some discussions what I try to say of the methodological approach in the European science history, especially in the first 2 decades of the 21st century. It shows itself. The centrifugal methodology seeking is the title of the presentation. I want to start from there. The historian of the science history is also the history of the methodological seeking. But from 21st century, it's a candidate to be transformed unconvertibly. First of all, anti-imperialism intention meant anti-colonization methodologies. I will be arguing these in my presentation, and starting from the same principle, deep history understanding, and these are the methods candidate to put their stamp on the history of science, and also the global science history and micro history methodologies, and taking them at hand is an approach still as a popular one, we can say. Okay, so what is our general problem? We have few general problematic. One of them is these new methodological quests. What does it mean for European history, science historians, and 2, for non-Europe, which is covering everyone. What does it mean to them, this methodology? Our first intention, like in the beginning of the presentation, is how we can avoid Eurocentric approaches, how we can critically work on them with a good intention, but we cannot perform it without changing our methodological approaches. Therefore, there are some methods I want to highlight, then more critical discussions. As of my topics, I work on the European geography aspect of the science history. Therefore, in the new era, in the recent times, European science and history is an integral part of the colonization history, which means that the scientific revolution, it has different definition, but let me say the first one, the scientific revolution does not only realized by means of Europe. What does this say? The source, finance, human resource, it's a huge colonization process under its roof. The scientific revolution occurred. Therefore, this argument is just a centrifugal approach. And these huge conceptualizations, such as scientific revolution, cannot be understood with Eurocentric approach. Is also for the nature philosophers, especially a famous Patricia Para, the science historian, very closely in the recent times, maybe this year, said that the position of Newton in colonization history was examined in London as a book. So what kind of methods were popular, and the micro history is known both.
Bakış açısından da tam bir merkez kaç metot.
But the subject of the study is small, but the historical concept can take us to intergeography travel in the very short time. The history of zero as the concept, as the mathematical concept, the history of zero. It's a micro history, but between the geography, it's a very meaningful travel.
Bir diğer metot global.
Another method is the global method. If we want to centrifuge from Eurocenter, if we want to understand global changes, we are using this methodology. Very shortly in 2022, there will be a book as the global history. Over the articles, it's been discussed. So we are waiting this book, especially the global effect of the colonialism. This method is important. Another method is the deep history, how the world is there, archaeological methods, and the historical methods as to how they are interlocked, and on the other hand, how the world history needs to be understood among the European science historians. These methods, what are they good for, or how they should be used? I couldn't find a Turkish word, therefore I said decolonization. I would like to say somehow it is freeing from colonization. I want to say this is the question. In the discipline which we call the science history, whether we are Euro or non-Euro historians, whether we need decolonization and whether it is valid or not, and which methods gives us the facilitation regarding this colonization. And when I say colonization, it's not only a political and historically and military colonization. At the same time, which is not my main expertise of field, but non-Euro colonization, how culturally it can be recourse. I am aware that I am in search of a methodological approach. I believe we need to think about that topic. And now the Western science history, the most wrong saying of the assumptions, and it is subjected to many critics, the dominance of the Western thinking ideas, which means that when Western thinks something, it becomes universal. Or the Western, how can I say, it's like westernization role, like Mrs. Pınar says, the root of the Orientalism goes back to Middle Age. She's very right, but in the 19th century and afterwards, this dominance, but not only political, but also intellectual dominance, it shows itself. Therefore, for European colonies, if we think on the basis of colonialism, of the imperialism point of view, this information and knowledge to be disseminated to the European colonies was seen very legit. Actually, what we say, the Western history of science being occurring in such atmosphere, one of the reasons is this colonization. How we can turn around it, it is very important, this problematic. It's some sort of a dominance issue, and in order to convert it back, we need to get use of the local histories, which means that over the geographies, if we leave and if we go over from my own, going out of my box, I'm telling this from the individual witnessing, it's possible to make it in this geography, but how can we turn it around? What should our objective be, if I might ask? I should say this, of the science history is not only from the past products like is the effort of the local and also local science, then from the general paradigm I'm saying the centrifuge. So we have the possibility to overcome it, and it means that we are overcoming a Eurocentric history, but of the Europe and of the Western history of science brings, which is otherization. We don't advise the otherwise, which means that the West saying that we are scientific, we made the science revolution, and on a contrary argument also doesn't work, because just like in the West, it is like an umbrella, an ideological perspective, and it prevents to understand the local and the ground. Therefore, what can we say about it? Some sort of, we are aware that we are some sort of under colonization as the non-Western geographies, but for the contrary, we need to find new methods. For instance, by this means, writing a world history, not only a history of science, but generally the world history, and also it is also translated into Turkish. There are books of the world history. Those referred points are always, when you look at the under scope of the European history of science. But what did China do about this time? And there is certain time for scientific revolution for Europe. But what happened for China? Again, in the same perspective, from the same perspective when we look at. So there is this misunderstanding, and our lecturer Nihal advised this, and I agree on this. So, as to thinking science is universal, it's a nice thing, but on the ground it doesn't work like that. So the historical subject can format it differently, and our duty as the historians to act on those differences and to diligent on this work. And there are things like this regarding the literature or labor of the work. For example, the ones who study European history science, they are not obliged to be Europeans, or the ones who work on Western history should not be non-Western, but there is this hegemony. The word historians, which are out of the word, always referring to the Western history, but a contrary reference is not much possible, we can say. Therefore, having global studies is really very tough thing. It's easy to say, but difficult to do. But by collaborating, we can have very nice studies, it's possible to say. But this is an activism, I should say. So European history of science last 20 years is an anti-colonization activism, like in the curriculum's re-evaluation, or teams to be reorganized, or new articles to be issued about this topic, and also for the non-European geographies, their local histories to be worked on. There are some recommendations, but there is something I want to say, which means that we are working locally in history doesn't mean that it's not that we will prioritize and appreciate the local. What we will try to do, that every one of us, from the point of our own work, to integrate into a whole. I think we should be in that, and it is for the European historians, and also for non-European history scientists. Then it's not we will appreciate only our own geography, would mean that we are also doing discriminating. And there is this thing, this science sociology, Mrs. Nihal mentioned, locality or nationality are hybrid concepts, and in the history, like Mrs. Pınar said, between Islam and Europe, there is the cultural interaction. Therefore, this knowledge is also hybrid. So appreciating so much of the local history is not healthy. We need to ask this ourselves, whether it is healthy or not. Okay, then. What I would like to say lastly, I will not keep my presentation long. It's an interesting thing. It's like the contrary of what I have said until now. Non-European academicians, this was the advice of Mrs. Pınar, I agree. The non-European academician should make a serious Europe reading. So if they are to be in a critical relation, so definitely we should know it very well, the European and Western history. Therefore, just like Mrs. Pınar said, we don't have an English historian or Russian historian or Spain, Russian. Why shouldn't we have? Therefore, from this point of view, the contribution of such an effort would be this. Our point of view will come from this geography, like Mrs. Nihal says. Every historian is a product of their own cultural concept, so our products will be different. So classical Europe, science history, reading of this, it would be much possible we will be out of it. Thank you for listening to me. I hope that it was a comprehensive presentation, I hope. Waiting Mrs. Dalia, Eurocentric, centrifugal approach for the history of science, and she mentioned the alternative history writing. Now, if you distinguished guests have questions, we can have them. The floor is yours. It seems we don't have a question. I can ask a question. Okay, then we have one. Thank you. Mrs. Nihal, of this narration of sociological history of science, whether it is used in Turkey, can you say that? Do we see such thing? Or I'm not asking only for Islamic history of science. I can say this under my thesis in the 17th century UK, while I was working on the travel of knowledge. If we wrote in a positive approach, so the cultural, economic, political background of this era wouldn't be touched, only the academics, museums, institutions who had roles. We would have a breakdown and then skip. But this kind of dissertations, while they are being written, because now it is being used in the Western as well, in Turkey, at least in the new dissertation, it is being used, we know it. But as for the book, whether I can give name from Turkey, but there are many Western-oriented books, but at least, for instance, in my own dissertation, this approach, we are also applying. For example, if we are to talk about the scientific revolution in UK, it's not only positivist approach appreciated science people, not only these and the roles of these, but also the background of that era, culture, religion, economy. So it needs to be a comprehensive. Actually, your problem is a part of the entire history of science narrative. I work Islamic philosophy, but even in the narrative of that, there are some main actors and arts. The history is written on them, but in those concepts and contexts of when they are written, both economical, political, and social, when they are ignored, it's just inefficient and something unrelated. But also being able to do this, what you propose, is really difficult, because for that purpose, at the same time, for Islamic history of science, let's talk about the Islamic history should be written with a point of view of sociology. However, as an outward observer, we can say that even the narration of the Islamic history, if we talk about in Turkey, it's over dynasties, over wars. So as we know, it's like a chronicle. So there is also a lack of sociological analysis. There are two words for these historians of science. They are additional burdens. On one hand, you need to know the stages of that evolution. For example, in 11th century work on medicine. Also, you need to know about historically and also religious structure or sectarian or everything, economical history. You need to know everything about the 11th century. Actually, maybe for the European history it can be made easier because the European histories continue to be narrated, but the Islamic history, there are some trials in Europe, but there is no reflection to Turkey. For example, Hudson, the famous book of the Journey of Islam, covers whole Islam history and gives an assessment over certain parameters, but applying this to the history of science would be a heavy burden. Therefore, historians of the science are going to the actors and books because there is an unexplored era. There are many names, many books, and exploring all these, finding them from the libraries, publishing them, there are many steps to be taken. So actually it's this kind of an conflict. We hope that we want whether the sociological or historical method to be used. Somehow we want to write again the Islamic history. On the other hand, what we have at our hand and what is accumulated does not allow it. So this is our conflict, how we can overcome. So when you ask, the Islamic History Atlas came into my mind, and that book was also in this context, and the memories and the cultural environment of the science people, and I'm not sure whether it touches on the economy. So Islamic Opinion Atlas, and that is an eye of the historian. When you talk about Mavera Nehir, it is not actually telling about Avicenna, so you cannot have these relations. So I started for questions. If you have questions, please. Hello, from İstanbul Üniversitesi Cerrahpaşa, Mr. Ferhat. I want to say my opinions from what I heard and what I synthesized. Actually, the main problem is on the thinking on science.
Ya da nazari olarak algılarsak, yani doğayı anlama.
If we take science as understanding the nature, especially positivism,
gibi düşündüğünü varsayıyoruz.
we either make it human or God. Humanization, for example, some natural things happen and we say the nature punished us, for example, is an example, or the universe is giving us a message. It's again a part of it, but the science doesn't think like human or God. But there is this a case.
Bir şey var, bilimi yücelt.
There is a tendency to take science like a human or God. If you think this as a scientific thinking method shows itself with some practices, and what are they? For example, through engineering or technology or medicine or law or management science.
Siyasal bilimlerle algılıyor çünkü bilimi bunlar uygulamalı olarak kullanıyor.
Because they use applied science. But in application, there are some mediators such as ideologies. It can turn into science or law or medicine through ideology, or like through economy or ergonomy or design. With this science, we miss them. This is the first problem. we think the appliance of science as science. So there is the being enemy to science. On the other words, we think science philosophy is science, but actually it's thinking on science. It's similarly, I believe these two mixes. Another topic is in history narrative. We need to look at the world, the universe. This universe is given to us and everything is about us, we should say, both in micro or macro scale. Who wondered the Eskimos or science in Africa, how they think, or how the science happened in China or Incas? Therefore, without doing this or without holistic approach, we cannot save ourselves from the Eurocentric, Western-centric science. The Western does it. A French can work on shamanism. And let's say a Chinese does not work, or an Arab does not work in shamanism, or a Turkish do not pay attention to Eskimos. We say the Red Indians are Turkish, but we don't have anthropological studies. So in order to see the whole, in order to say everything is dealing with us, what is example Einstein? And he wonders everything about the universe. What they say, what Einstein says universe is not a small part in world, or Freud, what he says human is not Euro-human. So we need to reach this if we are to write the history, or if we are to write a world-centric narration. All these factors we need to look holistically, but we have this, there isn't many dealing with the Western history, and in the other areas there isn't many interested people. When you can do that, you are present in a geography, or what the geography gives us. For example, Turkey, close neighbor, Balkans, Russians in South Arabic geography. So we work on history and philosophy regarding them. I don't say let's not do it, but if you want to look at holistically, all the world is something presented as, that's what I think, and it will break colonization as well. It will prevent it. And a nice recommendation that came to my mind now, like Renaissance in Beytül Hikme, there was a Renaissance. But maybe we need to do this, that we should find a term for that time of Beytül Hikme. If we say in Renaissance term, it will be anachronologic. If we name this period, but still within this integrity, again, we will be saving ourselves from the Western-oriented. I'm sorry I made it long. Thank you so much. It was very nice. On what you say, the last thing you mentioned, 12th century is the start of the Euro history. You mentioned that time. But here there is this problem. In the writing of the European history, there is the famous protection of by the Muslims, and there is certain reproduction. After the 12th century, Europe's relation with the Islamic world continued. Ottomans, Mamluks, all these huge connections, we see them as political relation, like a war of March. So in all this time, only in the 12th century, Europe continued this relation, or in the upcoming period, this intellectual relation that it continued. I work in the Middle Era Europe. In this 12th century and in the Middle Age, there is always relation. There is always building on what they took, and the science and technology, actually there isn't a turning point. But there are some problems. There are ethnical problems, government problems. However, science and technology progress interestingly. The reason 12th century, what they take from East, they built on it. For our own period, I don't work on Ottomans, but we have some lecturers working on it. They should assess this part. For instance, what did Western made a relation? They work politically and other side, but not political science. Maybe we can have self-critics. Where did we make mistake? Maybe we should ask this. I should say this. Middle Age is known to be dark, but that dark times is only regression. When you say dark, there shouldn't be any progress logically, but in the Western Europe, there is a process, development. Either it's from the Eastern world or Western world, because science and technology are separate concepts, but they are together. And it's a concept, all the world civilizations are together. Chinese, for example, we say they find everything. However, they didn't develop it on a different level. They are holistic. Actually, the main problem here is East-Western interaction. We don't know West, and we also don't know our history well. Maybe along with them, next generation would work better on this, but everything comes from the ancient times. So by this way we can look more universally, like Mr. Ferhat says. Actually, we are going back to the science understanding of Roger Bacon. If you pay attention, there is always a regression. Maybe while going upward, we forget to look at the Middle Age, always from different point of views. Maybe forgot this, and from the social aspect, maybe there would be different initiatives. Thank you so much. Is there anyone who would like to add something, a comment, question? Yes, please.
Only I want to point to an important issue. When we talk about the history of science in Islam and compare it with history of science in Europe, we should pay attention to this fact that there is two different worlds, and the spreading of different issues and multiple factors in Islamic era is too much more than Europe. When we talk about history of Islam in the vast territory from Andalusia to India, we have fundamentals and basements from ancient and pre-Islamic eras in each era and each territory. Therefore, these pre-Islamic history and pre-Islamic science in Persia, in Africa, in Mesopotamia, in India, influenced on the history of science in different eras and different schools of science in each part. Therefore, when we talk about the history of science in Islam, it needs a very, very deep methodological research to cover all of parameters and all of influential issues that can affect the way and the roots of these discoveries and development of science in this era. And the second important point is the multidisciplinary origin and nature of research, methodological research in history of science. It is not different in Europe and in Asia, but we need in our institutes, in universities, in departments to cover all aspects of all aspects in research in history of science. For example, in history of medical sciences, when we are working on the book of Razes, the book of Avicenna, we need to have different specialists that with different methodological approach to the fact. We need archaeologists, we need linguistics, we need historians, we need medical proficients, and we should learn teamwork and the correct methodology to look to this development story during the history. I think in our countries, in Turkey, in Iran, in Islamic countries, we need collaborations. At the third point, collaboration with together, because each part of this development is made in some parts of these huge territories from Africa, from Mesopotamia, Turkey, Iran, India, and other countries in this region. Therefore, many of the or weak points in this methodology or methodology is that we need to collaborations with together to find this puzzle. Some parts of this puzzle may be made in Uzbekistan, some parts may be in Iran, some parts in Turkey, some parts in Iraq, some parts in Syria, with very important notice that it's social events and pay attention to social parameters in each part of these vast territories, and also different times and up and downs in Mongol area, in Islamic Golden Age, translation era, and these parameters should be pay attention to them when we work on the methodology of research in this time.
Thank you so much. Eye-opening. Thank you so much. Evet, başka soru veya yorum yoksa?
No further question or remark. Yes, please, Mrs. Zahid. If I understood well of Professor Fuat Sezgin, after the West got information for 6 centuries, so that until they assimilated, then there is the creative period start, and what you say is, I think, fitting, or do you think it is fitting? In the 12th century, is the Western gets info from West, but until it comes to a creative period, for a long time it passes, like 600 years. Yes, they get the knowledge, but while processing there is a time passing. But in the world there is many civilization, whether East or West, and in some societies as they have good assessment. After a while, the Eastern comes a good point. Actually, what we say loss of time is that they got the accumulation, and by rebooting themselves. So in Roman era, there is retribution. So he was working on that time, and then Al Jazeera, a very important Turkish Muslim, and then it goes to 15th and 16th century, Leonardo da Vinci. There is always a continuity. However, as the Eastern world is on the peak, they didn't need, and there are some relations, and Islamic world was occupied, but in that time the Western was continuing. So it's a very creative period until the 16th year. There wasn't any regression, just they are. But the Islamic world, there is no regression, just they become forefront. So they close the gap, we can say. Thank you. I want to make a small contribution to what you say, and I don't know your name, but what Mr. Arman says very importantly summarized. That's our purpose while examining Islamic science in a holistic way, so I agree on that. And what Alfred Noyce says, we need to carry the torch of science from end to end, and every time the narrators of the summit will be themselves. So like Mr. Junaid says, we need to talk ourselves about more. I think we have listened a lot. Now we need to talk about ourselves to the world. So every nation, of course, there are times that they brighten their torch, and we need to look. And it's not about the local priority, just to write our own history, our own resume, and to be able to say this is our CV, because we have read a lot, but while positioning ourselves, every geography has their special thing. Thank you so much to three distinguished presenters. Hopefully tomorrow's meeting we will see you.